Hey, before the video starts, we would like to apologize because actually we lost everything we record and we filmed in English for this video. And we have to hurry because we have a last video for this series and we have to prepare for this summer big projects. So we are going to put the English playback over the French versions. Thank you for your understanding. Have a nice viewing. Hi everybody! I meet you today for the fourth video of our history with First Nations. We come already close to the end of this series. In the previous videos, we completed the time of great discoverers and explorers, and we stopped around 1630 with the colony of Quebec, set but weak, whereas southward the English colonies were already growing stronger, leading to the beginning of the conflicts. In this fourth part, we fall right in the middle of the action, in the war between France and England, which extend to the colonies and which are going to involve the Indigenous Nations. However, I am not going to follow these conflicts minutely, describing the progression of English territories compared to the French territories, nor to recount each conflict, each battle and who won and so on. But I will give you some anecdotes and some episodes of this period, so you can have an overview of the role played by the English, the French, the Canadians, but also the First Nations and the Métis in this story. In this video, by Canadians, I mean the descendants of French people born in the New France, and the Métis, we didn't speak about them yet. They are the first people born half French, half indigenous. They have developed their own culture mixed of their ascendant traditions, making it rich and unique. Their language, music and art reflect it very well. This is the last video I will do with the help of the book Ils étaient l'Amérique, so in English They Were America, from Serge Bouchard and Marie-Christine Lévesque at Lux Editions. This book finishing around the year 1760. So let's go for about a century of history in North America. (1626). As if it wasn't already enough people here, the Dutch arrived to start a colony, the New Amsterdam. So you can notice that the settlers are all very creative. They occupy the area from the current Philadelphia to New York, and to locate you the British expansion, they went northward to set up a colony up to the current Boston. The Dutch have a second good idea. They are going to give weapons to the Iroquois. So far, the Europeans were reluctant to arm the indigenous, fearing they would return these guns against them. However, the profits take over this good caution. Thus, the Iroquois are the first indigenous armed in the northeastern America. This new reality signs the death sentence of the Keshisipirini Algonquin. But not only. The Wendats are also going to see their population fall apart due to the series of armed attacks. In 1640, when the Iroquois have launched their first armed assault, in the emergency the allied nations of the Saint Laurent asked the French for muskets and guns, in the matter to equally face their enemies. The French answer, transmitted through some Jesuits, so religious men, must have been very astonishing for the leaders of the French nations, who, coming to seek for military support, receive a reduced ultimatum. Only the baptized Indians will receive firearms. The pagans, the majority, are left on their own. And yes, this is something I didn't talk about yet, but in the shadow of the explorers, the Jesuits also pushed their way, having for mission to convert the indigenous people to the Catholic religion. Some indigenous join it, some see in this more like a friendship symbol, a symbolic gesture, and do not necessarily deny their own beliefs. Others have the phobia, even the hate of these men in black gowns who are interfering in their life to wash their brains. Nevertheless, the Dutch, as the British, may be arming the Iroquois, thus don't manage to take over the French and their American allies. This alliance still continued from 1650 to 1760. Except the Iroquois, the Indigenous Nations from New Orleans up to Quebec often stand up for the France and the New France in the conflicts that shake this part of America. And there is a reason. It is simple. These nations know the English abuses against the indigenous from Virginia and the Algonquins in New England, through extermination wars which continue since 1635 in Boston, New York and Connecticut region. The British, more numerous, more active, more determined to settle themselves for residence than the French, are colonizing the country. They take control of the indigenous lands, cut all the trees, transform the landscape forever, but above all, they chase the Americans by pushing them westward, beyond the Adirondacks Mountains, which will become the frontier, a frontier between the civilized world and the savages, which will progress more and more westward. On the French side, instead of a colonization inside the lands, the good old fur trade is continuing without any apparent threat to the integrity of the territory. French don't touch the forest, they cut only a few trees apart from the Saint Laurent Valley, and their missionaries work more to colonize their Amerindian souls than their lands. In September 1685, French and Iroquois try to establish a peace, but this one will not last. A little bit later, in 1701, takes place the Great Gathering of Montreal, where 36 nations, so more than 1,300 indigenous, are welcomed by the French and the Canadians of the city, so a population of about 1,200 inhabitants, in order to negotiate a peace with the Iroquois. From the very beginning, it takes a really bad way. The Iroquois were supposed to bring the French and the indigenous prisoners, but they only bring back the French prisoners. This is a very serious offense, to which they will answer that the prisoners integrate themselves and do not want to come back. The other nations do not believe them, but it is true. The Five Nations Iroquois do not keep the prisoners apart. They include them in the families that have lost a member, allowing them to keep a certain demography, despite the wars and the severe diseases. Ultimately, after 1 month of gathering, they signed the Great Peace of Montreal. The peoples are especially tired from all these conflicts. Following this Great Peace of Montreal, the region called les Pays-d'en-Haut, that I can translate like the upwards countries, opened up to the Canadians and French. Today, it would partly correspond to the region of the Great Lakes, lying between the south of Ontario and the northeast of the US. However, at that time, this region was in the depths at the edge of the New France, and was including the Ontario province as well as fully or partly the American states of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and New York. During 50 years, the French colonial government will build what it calls forts through the Pays-d'en-Haut, where will be installed small military troops, but in reality it will be more like fur trade posts, where the Canadian woodrunners come to trade their pelts and where the indigenous families are gathering to exchange their furs. Let's talk a little about the woodrunners. The woodrunners were itinerant merchants who performed without any license, so to speak like some outlaws, the fur trade. Free and independent, they play an important role in the European exploration of the continent and established essential commercial relationships with the indigenous people. From 1701 to 1755, thousands of Canadian woodrunners and hundreds of French soldiers mixed themselves with the nations of this great region. The majority of these woodrunners and quite a number of soldiers start their family by marrying American women. We then witness the explosion of the Métis birth. These children bear the name of their father, but are raised by their mother, according to the law of the indigenous world. This is how are born the mixed blood from the Pays-d'en-Haut, who will become the American Métis, a new nation which will know its finest hour, but also some really hard moments of humiliation and defeat. If you wish to learn more about these woodrunners, there is a very nice video on the YouTube channel L'Histoire nous le dira that we put in the description. And if you have some time, we also put the description the opening speech from Serge Bouchard for a forum about the Francophonie in America. For those who can maybe understand French, he is very captivating because he immerses us in the head of a young Frenchman living for America at that time, and about the imprint of the Francophones on the territory, notably with the toponym study. This is also during the same time that the Amerindian slave traffic sets in New France. Of course, not with members of the nations with which the French and Canadians are allied, no, it is nations beyond the Great Lakes region, towards the Great Plains. It is among these new nations encountered that the woodrunners and the trappers captured people to bring them eastward and to sell them notably at the Montreal slaves market. We are now going to look at the life of two persons who play an important part between about 1750 and 1766 and approach the conflict through their experience. Charles Langlade is born in 1729 in Michilimackinac, in the peninsula that will become the Michigan. His father is Augustin Langlade, a first-generation Canadian, native from Trois-Rivières region, and a pelts merchant whose business are going very well. You must know that Trois-Rivières at that time was the city of the woodrunners, French, Canadians, and Métis. It really was the place to be for the fur trade. He has done a love marriage with Charles' mom, named Domitilde, an Odawa, sister of the chief Niswake. Odawa are a nation that took the place of the Ketchipieri Algonquin, chased from the Outaouais Valley in 1640 by the Iroquois and their firearms. In fact, it is their name Odawa, which will give Outaouais on the French side and Ottawa on the British side, so the name of nowadays Canada's capital. Therefore, Charles Langlade is a Métis from the Pays-d'en-Haut. If we can speak about his life so well today, it is thanks to the memories of his grandson Augustin Grignon that have been collected in 1857. Charles is only 10 years old when his uncle, the chief Niswake, wants to take him to the battlefield. According to one of his dreams, little Charles, like a lucky charm, will allow him and his warriors to win the next battle. Charles' father agrees, only if he don't participate to the fights. And after 2 defeats in a row, Odawa's warriors came back winners, thanks to the new talisman. That was all it took for Langlade's invincibility myth to spread across the country. The young Charles can't die at war. Revered by the warriors, he then became friends with an Odawa promised to celebrity, but unknown at that moment, a young warrior named Pontiac or Pontiac, known today under the name of Pontiac. They are going to be indivisible, fighting side by side during several years. In May 1754, the young George Washington would have killed 10 Canadians and their officer Jumonville, whereas the latter was in a diplomatic mission, protected by a white flag. And we still don't know the truth because the English blame the opposite camp to have started the fire. Washington knows that the retaliations are coming fast. He then built a little fort to protect himself, for necessity. 700 French, Canadian, and Indigenous fighters appear and make Washington surrender. The events at Fort Necessity mark the starting point of what the Americans call the French and Indian War, and what our historians qualify as 7 Years' War. A war opposing the British and the French by interposed Indigenous, Canadians, and Métis nations. It is in this background that Langlade and Pontiac are going to fight. What is important to understand for this time of history is that the Odawa, Menominee, Potawatomi, Chouanon, Sauk, Illinois, Winnebago, Wyandots, and other nations from les Pays-d'en-Haut form an international troop of indigenous warriors who fight to defend their word and the France's interests as far as they estimate them consistent with their own. Each nation is sovereign, not submitting to anyone's orders. With them, an undetermined number of Métis and Canadians, independent-minded, experienced to the life in the wood. They are nearly 1,200 warriors that move from fight to fight. They follow Langlade, Pontiac, and many other leaders because they really want to. The English, shaken by their strength and also by their way of doing war, fear them strongly. As for the French, they take a great advantage of the situation. In 1755 took place the important Battle of Monongahela in the Ohio, which defined the official beginning of the 7 Years' War. The General Braddock leads the British army, and Washington is here for his revenge. The British are going to lose, the general himself die, and it is Washington who protects the last survivors' escape. However, for each British loss, so for necessity as for Monongahela and the others, the British didn't lose against the Indigenous, Métis and Canadians. No way! They put in their report that they lost against the Royal Army composed of very French soldiers, because it makes a far better resume. In addition, the France is going to agree to receive the honors of these victories. It will make much better further history. Yet, there is no French army. There are only few soldiers around the trade posts. The France don't want to invest more money in North America, whereas the British build up a numerous army of 20,000 men. And yet, the Indigenous, Métis and Canadians warriors have made them so mad on the battlefield. These warriors find absurd that two armies watch each other in the eyes and give a starting signal to shoot each other. This is not for them. They are hiding in the forest, attacking by trick and surprise, using the field to their advantage. The same year, the British also attacked the Acadia and the Acadians. Despite the help from the Micmac, who hide them and help them run toward the north and west forest, so toward what will become the New Brunswick, their more than a century friendship will fade away and be forgotten with the violence of the deportations. In 1759 takes place the Great Battle of Quebec, the Plains of Abraham battle. On one side there is the military Marquis Montcalm, and on the other the British officer Wolfe. So in the middle of the battle, Quebec hold out. One part of the British army is already positioned at the west, when one night Wolfe unloads another important part of his army near the Montmorency River, but by the east. The indigenous pathfinders of Langlade and Pontiac detect this night move. Langlade then goes to warn the Knight of Lévis, François Gaston de Lévis under his complete name, that they must attack the British without further delay and surprise them with a frontal assault. However, Lévis is skeptical. He don't want to take seriously some savages. And this is how the fall of Quebec happened. The French officers don't know that Langlade's information could have made them win. No, on the contrary, they are going to write that the Indians and Canadians fought very bad, that they were even hiding in the woods, and that they refused to obey to the orders of the military hierarchy. There has always been a certain neglect regarding the contribution of the Métis to the North American history. Same when it comes to the identity and the role of the French Canadians. Like there were only French from France and Indians during these conflicts. By the way, everything is in the name, the French and Indian War. The following year, in 1760, Langlade and Pontiac participate to the Sainte-Foy battle with the French army. The French side is going to win and start a siege of the town of Quebec. This one will be quickly interrupted because the French are going to retreat, because the British supports arrive. They retreat in Montreal, and despite that the Canadians, Métis and Indigenous want to resist, the French lay down their weapons. This is the surrender of Montreal. This is the end of the adventure for Langlade and Pontiac and the nation from the Pays-d'en-Haut. They are going back home to the Great Lakes. This year, the two friends take a different path. Realistic and opportunistic, Langlade takes the side of the British winner, knowing they have a great need of his expertise. He obtains the position of Director of the Indian Affairs in the Illinois, Wisconsin and Michigan regions, turning his back to France, which has deeply disappointed him. 3 years later, so in 1763, the French and the British signed the Treaty of Paris. The France surrendered the entire Canada to the Great Britain apart from Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon. However, the resistance doesn't stop here for Pontiac. The British, the only fur buyers from now on, dictate to their old indigenous enemies some unfavorable trade rules. The British officers don't take them seriously. Amherst treats them with contempt and condescension. Amherst is the man who commands from Detroit, which became the headquarters of the seizure of British power over the Pays-d'en-Haut. From 1763 to 1766, Pontiac is going to lead a force of a few thousand of warriors from a dozen of indigenous nations and quite a few number of Canadian rebels. This is Pontiac's rebellion, the goal to take back Detroit.
Le roi de France s'est endormi. Il se réveillera bientôt pour chasser les intrus qui saccagent les territoires de nos frères rouges. Nous ne recevons plus aucune provision. Les Anglais nous vendent leurs marchandises 2 fois plus cher et leur pacotille ne vaut rien.
Unfortunately, Pontiac's plan will be falling apart. The expected surprise effect will not work. The British have already been aware of his intention by several persons, Canadians, Indigenous, and even his old companion. Langlade has sent a letter to the British. A part of the warriors will then do the siege of the fort of Detroit, while other groups of the Indigenous Nations coalition will succeed to seize other fortified trade posts, more or less important, 9 in total. In this context, in which Amherst endures several defeats and feels humiliated by those indigenous who he strongly diminishes and denigrates, he is going to be the instigator of a very severe action that is still being debated nowadays, and maybe you already heard about it. He would have inoculated the smallpox to the Americans of the Great Ohio in 1763 by giving them blankets already used by sick peoples. We don't know the consequences of this action because the disease was already circulating between all British, Canadians, Indigenous. However, his intention was really there, documented in written orders. The siege lasts far too long. The nations involved are tired. They must take back the hunt, feed the community. Pontiac's coalition is breaking apart little by little. Lacking in allies, the Ottawas give up the siege of Detroit. During 3 other years, the war is continuing, all the same. But July 26, 1766, Pontiac and other chiefs signed in Fort Ontario a peace treaty with the British. Pontiac then retired in the Illinois country. He dies tapped by a Peoria Indian leaving a fur trade shop. We still don't know how and why of this case. The role of Pontiac is often not well known. Yet his rebellion will have forced the British government to revise its approach of the relation with the indigenous of North America. It is this rebellion that will be at the origin of the Royal Proclamation of 1763 of King George III, creates a vast indigenous reserve at the west of the Appalachian Mountains. It also clearly indicates that the lands that the indigenous people did not give or sell are reserved to them. Thus, the British hope to ensure the allegiance and loyalty of the First Nations. As for Langlade, he will survive all his battles, 99 it is said. He really was invincible at war as predicted by the Ottawa chief, since it is in his retirement, in his bed, that he will die in 1801 at 72 years old. Today, the Americans know him as the father of the Wisconsin. That's some unusual journey and incredible destinies for these 2 men. In nowhere they were French, but very first Canadians, a Métis and a First Nation who defended the interest of the France and above all their freedom. In the next and final video we have a lot of work, because we are going to present you the sequel and the end of the history. From the beginning of the British management up to nowadays. And if you can't answer those questions, what the indigenous nations have become after the wars, how the status evolved, what is the reserve today, what are the indigenous residential schools, well, I invite you to really watch the last video, because Camille and I have been shocked by the amount of information we didn't have, and the hard situation indigenous nations have been through and still faced. I will share a lot of documentation, and we are going to address some tough topics, say what it is important to say, and be aware of the ravages of the colonization. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you really like it. I thank Camille who supervised these records and who will take care of the editing. See you soon. Bye.